Brings up an interesting question, Matt, and that is there a risk in this strategy? Is there a risk in being so dedicated to ousting the establishment Republican that you sacrifice the potential for a Republican at all? That you end up with Harry Reid instead of a Republican who could challenge him legitimately?
Well, you need a competent candidate. You need a candidate that actually knows how to run. And I would point to Florida instead of Delaware to show how principle actually trumps political expediency, because Marco Rubio is a whole package. Ted Cruz is a whole package, and we're not risking the seat in Texas by insisting on better than average.
Would you say that the race right now, though, has made Dewhurst, if he were to win, a better candidate? I mean, would you say that that's one way at least to look at this, a glass half full way to look at this, if it weren't to go the way Freedom Works is hoping it goes?
As long as the citizens of Texas remain vigilant, I think all these guys gravitate towards bad behavior unless there's a countervailing force coming from the bottom up.
So I want to get to the question, back to the question of competency. And you said you'd still got to have a candidate who knows how to run. But what about a candidate who knows how to govern? That while one may be more authentic, more, rock-ribbed and red-blooded in his conservative values, the other candidate may know better how to get things done when you need to cut a deal, when you need to compromise, where the other candidate doesn't because he is so ideological. Does that figure or factor into your thinking?
Well, if you're trying to fix a problem, you have to come up with a solution first. And what I hate about the D.C. culture is this, we almost worship at the altar of bipartisanship, as if splitting the difference on a bad idea is a solution to a problem. What we're looking at with guys like Ted Cruz is what I call a legislative entrepreneur. He's going to approach entitlement reform with a real solution, and then he's going to go into the legislative process and try to convince his colleagues. That's very different from saying, you know what, we just need to come to a consensus and split the difference before you've actually laid out the problem.
Has that been Dewhurst's approach, which is just consensus for its own sake? I get to sign a piece of legislation and look like I'm doing stuff? I mean, is that a fair sort of critique of him as a politician?
I would suggest that that's exactly who he is.
And that's the difference. When my political science professor taught us that perception is reality, right? Social repetition creates reality. And what happens is that, unfortunately, because I'm very conservative, and Marco Rubio was the counterbalance to the example I used in Delaware as a positive, and thank God. Because I think that principle, it should always trump politics if you're going to be true to what you believe and actually get things done in this country. This country is on a path of destruction if we don't do something very seriously and very soon about some of the more, moral issues. And we need people like Ted Cruz in the Senate. But the problem in the House of Representatives with the Tea Party folks and potentially in the Senate, because it's such a Byzantine place, the way things are run, that how do you navigate the system and still get things done, to Amy's point, and not compromise your principles? It's a difficult balance, and I think some of the Tea Party freshmen have learned that. In the beginning, it was a little rocky, but I think they've learned how to balance that, and it's important. The Senate is the most important thing next to the presidency that we need, because God forbid Obama gets reelected and then we lose the Senate, we're in trouble.
I'm confident Ted Cruz, who went to Harvard Law School and is a rock star, is a rock star lawyer. Well,
Ted Cruz has a real
he's also president, Amy. The point I'm trying to make here is that I'm very confident that the inner workings and I think that a lot of the time people in Congress like to sort of propagate this myth of it's so hard to do this job and you got to learn how to cut the deals and everything else. You figure that out on the job, and when you come from a background like Ted Cruz, where you've argued cases in front of the Supreme Court, you understand the law inside and out, and are an incredibly sharp mind, I have no worries that he'll figure this out.
And he's got 6 years to do it anyway.
So let me tell you what I think.
So it sounds like a Ted Cruz table.
I think, well,
let
me tell you what I think.
He's a CIA guy's a man of integrity and moral fibers in the agency.
This is not Marco Rubio versus Charlie Crist.
That's an
it's
important
simply
distinction.
not that race. Charlie Crist was a different animal than David Dewhurst is. What I think is that conservatives, many on the right, see Ted Cruz as their next Marco Rubio. I think there is a sense of falling in love with Ted Cruz, from National Review to George Will, and perhaps to Freedom Works as well. In other words, what I think this is about is you really want this guy, more so than you really don't want Dewhurst. And what I have trouble...
It's excellent versus very good.
So what I have trouble with, though, is I'm not sure Texans feel the same way, whether or not it's campaign donations or polling. This sense of we must have Cruz doesn't seem so far, Matt, to have been one that Texans have adopted?
Well, it's interesting because as it happens, next Thursday, we are hosting an event in Dallas, Texas called Free Pack, and none other than Ted Cruz is speaking at that event the weekend before the Tuesday runoff. The runoff is going to have probably half as many people show up as the primary did. That's a strategic advantage for people that are motivated, for people that are going to walk on weekends, that are going to do the door-to-door. That's a strategic advantage of the Tea Party. We're not going to outspend them. We're not going to run more TV ads. But the power today is from the bottom up. The power is citizens that are actually willing to take a responsibility to do something. So if Texans that don't care don't like Ted Cruz, it really doesn't matter because they're not going to show up.